1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 says this: "Put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the spiritual milk, that by it you may grow into salvation." That's our goal here today, is to be spiritually nourished and fed. Longing, as he says, like infants, not just for any milk, but for spiritual milk. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 18 today, looking at the first 16 verses. And this is what it says. As soon as David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Verse 6, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet the king Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but he had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. And that's the word of the Lord. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a time in your life when you were given an award or honored by your peers for excellence and or hard work? And if so, why were you recognized and how did that make you feel? All right? Have you ever had a time where people recognized you for your hard work or your excellence? Growing up, I was not the kid who was a high performer, not necessarily because I couldn't, but because I just didn't care. I was the type of kid that in school preferred to sit near a window where I could just look out and daydream all day. It was one of those things where I wanted to be out exploring all the time. When it came to sports, I played sports when I was young, but then due to medical reasons in junior high and high school, I wasn't able to play sports anymore. So I threw myself into music. And I remember when I was 16 years old, a sophomore in high school, I was at an event in the high school auditorium, and they were recognizing students and giving different awards. And I was just sitting there. I had never really been in one of those settings where I'd gotten an award. So I was doing what I typically do, thinking of something else. And while I'm sitting there, all of a sudden, somebody was tugging on my arm and trying to get me to stand up. And I kind of looked up, and all these people were pointing at me and going like this. And I was like, what? And they were saying, they said your name. And I was like, huh? Typical response from Tim, huh? Right? Like, what? And they're like, you just got that award. And on that night, I was recognized for excellence in music. I wasn't the best musician, but I had improved that last 2 years so much. I'd started taking drum lessons. And over my freshman and sophomore year, I worked really hard at drumming, whether it was marching, concert, or I had gotten my Pearl Export Series drum set with the power toms that were extra big, and it was jet black, right? I started drumming a lot, and I was in choir and started working on singing a lot. And at that moment, I was recognized by my peers for the hard work that I had put in. And there were two big reactions. One, I felt incredible because suddenly people were excited, people were clapping, and it felt so good to be in that place. But later that evening and for the next few weeks, I also had people giving me dirty looks. And most of them were juniors and seniors who were trying to get into good schools and wanted that award to be on their resume to a school, right? And who had taken it? The little sophomore boy whose head was always in the clouds, right? So I experienced two things. People excited and saying, great job, and people upset and mad. From the text we read today, that's what we see going on. And really, there's three big things that we can get from this text. First, as we look at David, we see what it looks like when you have the love of the people. The love of the people. And it's one of those things, in verses 14 and 16 of this story today, we read this. David had success in all his undertakings. Why? For the Lord was with him. And all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Think about that. In everything David does, he has success. Have you ever known somebody like that? Don't you just love people like that? Right? If David was in the 1980s, his name would have been Ferris. Right? Bueller. Everything just goes right for this guy. And he's going in and out before the people. They see him day by day, week by week. And it's just success upon success upon success. And the people love him. Where did this success start? Well, it started in the previous chapter and the one before that. We know from the story we've been reading that Saul was the first king of Israel. He had the opportunity to rule well, but he kept rebelling against God, disobeying his commands. And we've seen in Saul's life a pride begin to grow more and more and more. He started out with a lot of humility, but once he got glory, he became prideful. And it started eating away at Saul. Why is he disobeying the Lord? Because he thinks he's all that. He thinks he knows better and he can do it better. It's pride. And at one point in time, because of his disobedience, through the prophet Samuel, God told Saul, I am taking away the kingdom from you now, and it will go to another person who has a heart after me. And who was that person? A young shepherd boy from Bethlehem named David. And David was anointed to be king. What we saw in the next story about David was that as the Spirit of God departed from Saul, God allowed an evil spirit to start tormenting him. Saul is at a place in his life where he is being tormented. And they discover there's one way for that torment to stop. And what it is they bring David in, who's a great musician and psalmist. And every time he starts to play music and worship to the Lord, that evil spirit departs. That's an interesting story. The Holy Spirit departs from Saul because of disobedience. An evil spirit comes to him. But every time there is the music and the worship of God, the evil spirit then departs. Another plug to why we should worship as a church, okay? Yeah, incredible. And then last week, my friend Ken preached for me, and I was so thankful that he filled in for us. But he shared the story of David and Goliath. Here's Israel with all of their warriors in a valley against the Philistines, and they do what ancient people would do. Let's have a contest of champions. And whichever champions wins, that is the army that wins the day. And there will be a price to pay for it. So the Philistines come out, and who do they have? Goliath. Goliath. Anyone ever fought an 8-foot-tall person? Like, that's crazy. This guy's like a grizzly bear, right? And he comes out, and no one in Israel steps up to be the champion. Why? They're all afraid. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. Today before church, there were a few people that got a little bit nervous when they looked out. And what did they see? A strange dog running around. All right? A strange dog. Now think about that. Sometimes if we get nervous, like if we're out somewhere and there's a strange dog running around, how would you feel about a grizzly bear running around, right? Okay, that's like Goliath. He's this huge person. Huge. But David is different than any other person in Israel. His outlook on what is possible is different. And where everybody else gives in to fear, David gives in to courage. And we read this in the previous chapter in verse 37. David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And King Saul looked at it and said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." As David is standing out in front of Goliath, he doesn't have armor, he doesn't have a sword, he has a sling with a rock, and David's there, Goliath is there saying, "Are you a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Best impression of Andre the Giant. And it says this, and David said to Goliath the Philistine, "You come to me with the sword and with the spear and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with the sword or with the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Amen. That's a man right there, right? Wow, look at this. And David does just that. He shows courage that nobody else in Israel was able to operate in. And courage isn't having a lack of fear. Courage is being able to move forward even in the face of fear. And because of that, the nation begins to follow him. They love him. They love him. What does that tell us? People will follow a leader when they lead with courage and conviction. If you're a leader, well, do you have courage? And do you have conviction? By the way, do you want to know how you can tell right away if you're a leader? Turn around and look and see if anybody's following you. No one's following you, you're not a leader, right? But people will follow. Conviction and courage, and that's what we see in David. If you are finding yourself lacking those two things, how did David get it? How? His trust in the Lord. He had faith. He could see what God had done in the past and knew that God would act the same way in the present. He trusted the Lord. When everybody else was fearful, he said, no, God can do this, and he will do this. That's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they're thrown into a fiery furnace. What do they say to Nebuchadnezzar? My God can save us. He will save us. But even if he doesn't, we will not bow down to you. Their trust in the Lord and his plan. Brother and sister, what are you fearing today? What has you paralyzed? Where are you finding yourself anxious, depressed, waking up in the middle of the night, ruminating on things? I do that. I have a lot of anxiety in my life. When I look back, when I was younger, I was very happy-go-lucky. I struggle with that today because I have anxiety about things. And there's a lot of times I wake up in the middle of the night worried about stuff. And you know what helps me fall back asleep? When I quit gripping onto those things like this and I open my hands up and I say, Lord, here it is. Here's what I'm fearful about, and I give it to you. And now I trust you with that. At the end of the service, we're going to take communion while we sing a last song. Can I encourage you, before you take communion, if this is describing you, just to go like that and say, Lord, I give this to you right now, and I trust in you. As you take communion, trusting in the blood of the Lamb. You look at this, and everything's going good for David. The people love him, but in verse 15, there's a but, right? And it's this one that's just glaring. When Saul saw that David had great success, he stood in fearful awe. He stood in fearful awe. I kind of feel bad for Saul. And I feel bad for him because I think I relate to Saul and I understand where he's coming from. Put yourself in Saul's shoes. Put yourself in Saul's shoes. Here he is. He is, what do we know about him? A head and shoulders taller than any other man in Israel. If anyone was supposed to go out and fight Goliath, who's the biggest guy that the Israelites have? Saul, right? Saul. We also know this from Saul. It says that he is more handsome than anybody in all of Israel, right? So like I said before, he's a combination if you were to slam Shaquille O'Neal and Brad Pitt together or something, right? That's King Saul. And here he is. In this past, he was this mighty, good-looking hero. But now, he didn't act. His son Jonathan didn't act. Jonathan had been a hero and a champion. Saul had gathered to himself all of the men in Israel who were the best warriors. None of them acted. It was this little shepherd man from Bethlehem. And yeah, there's things that David has going for him. I love in one of the Psalms, David praises the Lord and thanks him for what? Giving him arms the size of cedar trees. Wow, that's awesome, right? That's incredible. The guy's ripped, but he's like Spud, right? He's little. And as Saul goes back to the capital with his military procession, all of the women come out. All of the women playing their tambourines, singing joyfully, and they're saying, wow, King Saul, you've killed your thousands. Whoa, but David, he's killed his 10,000s. As I think about that, in my head, I hear the song Twist and Shout, and I picture the movies that I've seen of women when the Beatles would come to America and sing, right? And just the craziness going on. And that's kind of what's being described here. Here comes David, and all the women are coming out along the road from every town, every village, and singing praises to him. And Saul's like, if he is getting this much glory and praise, the only thing left for him is my crown, my throne, my job, my position. And Saul gets angry. He gets jealous. He gets envious. He's described as displeased. And from that day, he began to eye David. It's the first side eye in the Bible, right? He's eyeing him. He's like, To the point where, once again, David is in the royal court and Saul's being tormented by an evil spirit. And David is playing and Saul's like, pointy stick, David wall. Hurls a spear, right? These are different times, okay? These are different times. He just like hurls a spear at David. What does David do? Dodge, keeps playing. Saul's like, missed. Grabs a second spear, hurls it at David. What does David do? Dodges, keeps playing. David is so chill, right? And everyone can see what is happening to Saul. He is being eaten alive by his pride, his fear, his envy, his jealousy, trying to hold on to everything he has, to the point where he has opened himself up to evil spiritual attack and is becoming murderous. That's what that does inside of people. Jealousy destroys unity and it breeds rivalry. Let me say that again. Jealousy destroys unity and breeds rivalry. That's something in our culture that we love. We praise rivalry between groups. You don't believe me? A lot of times competition moves beyond competition that is sportsmanlike, that is something that is kind of fun, into something that is overly competitive and begins to take on things that are not right. That are not right. Low key. It's one thing in our state to joke about who's better, the Ducks or the Beavers. Okay, good, no one left. Yeah, you look at that, and there's a rivalry there, right? And for most of us, it's just kind of a fun rivalry. Have you ever seen people that actually get at odds over that, though? And it's just crazy. It's like, you guys, one's a duck and one's a beaver? Really? Like, come on. Why can't Oregon have a platypus? You look at it, it's silly. But think about our state being torn apart. Are you conservative or liberal? Are you Republican or Democrat? There are two types of people in this world, just so you know. Those who like Neil Diamond and those with taste. Anyways, you look at it. Oh, I got a boo for that one. You look at it, and it's one of those things. Shoot, now I have Sweet Caroline going through my head. Ba, ba, ba. Okay. You look at it, and there's these rivalries that take place that are caused by jealousy. And you know what that's like because you have had people jealous of you. But brothers and sisters, it's something inside of us that Christians, that we react to. In fact, we see it in the church all the time. You want to see something that's sad to me? Go around pastors' retreats, pastors' conferences, get together a bunch of pastors in a room, and suddenly pastors start comparing, trying to find the pecking order by whose church is biggest and who has the newest building and who has the most property and who's had the most baptisms. And there's this pecking order that starts to take place. You know, I get it. There was one time in my life when I was younger where I was kind of complaining to my wife about another pastor who was a friend of mine, and she had the spiritual discernment to hear through everything I was saying that I thought were good complaints, and she looked at me and she goes, "Tim Davis, you're jealous." And I was like, "No, I'm not." But that's the thing. Do you realize the same things we do in elementary school, junior high, and high school, we still act the same way a lot of times as adults? Yes. We need to grow and mature spiritually. Within the body of Christ, there is no place for envy or jealousy. And brothers and sisters at this church, we have a lot of blessings from the Lord right now. We have a lot of blessings. Don't ever think we're all that. Have you ever noticed that I don't sit there and I say, "Hey, welcome CTKers," because it's not about our brand. It's about who he is. Welcome all of you who have put your faith in Christ. In my life, I've learned 3 keys to maintaining unity and to blow apart rivalry. The first one is this: when the Lord blesses someone, celebrate with them. Amen. When somebody is blessed by the Lord, celebrate. Just say, "Hey, that's awesome. Great job. Good job." If you feel yourself starting to get jealous, celebrate. Thank the Lord for the blessings in that person's life. Celebrate with those who have blessings. Second, when God blesses you, turn around and bless somebody else. Remember, you're not all that. You're not all that. So bless somebody else when God blesses you. Did you ever think that maybe that's why he's blessing you, to make you a funnel? You know, it's really interesting. In my life personally, some of the wealthiest people I have ever met are also the most giving people. And it's like God just blesses them because he knows they're going to go ahead and take those blessings and funnel it right out to everybody else. Isn't that awesome? And I'm not saying that like, and if you do that, God will make you wealthy. No, don't hear me like that, okay? Man's not Benny Hinn. But you look at it, it's one of those things. Bless others. And third, always thank the Lord for the blessings he's given you because it's pure grace. He doesn't owe you anything. He doesn't owe you anything. When he blesses you, it's pure grace, a free gift. Him saying, "I just want to bless you right now." Remember that. In the story, we also see the humility of a prince. I love what we read about Jonathan in this story. So humble. Let me remind you, it says this: the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, gave it to David and his armor, and even his sword and his bow and his belt. That's incredible right there. It was earlier in the book of Samuel, Jonathan, who's the prince in Israel, that was the hero. He and his armor bearer, when he was younger, took on a whole garrison of Philistines, and in their first attack, wiped out 20 of them. That's incredible. But at this time, he did not act like the prince and the hero when faced with an enemy. And so, when David has the victory, and he sees these blessings having to David. In fact, in just a couple of chapters, Jonathan's actually going to look at David and say, "You're going to be the king." Think who's saying that. He's the prince. Technically, it should have gone to him. But he's looking at David and he says, "No, I'm going to bless you." That's humility. Incredible humility. As a side note, what this passage isn't saying is that they were lovers. Okay, that's a recent interpretation that has come out in the last, 10 to 15 years. People trying to say, oh, right here, Jonathan and David were lovers. In the Greek parts of the Bible, in the New Testament, in that language, there's 4 different words for love, and they define it out with different types of love. In both English and Hebrew, there's 1 word. And people think we should be able to understand by the context what's going on with that word. What do we mean by it? So, for instance, you hear me talk about my wife. And I will talk about my wife, and I'll be like, I love my wife. I love my wife. And in the next few minutes, you might hear me say something like, I love Thai food. It's not the same love, okay? Same word, but I mean 2 totally different things. And I want to put that out there because today there are people that are manipulating other people with false doctrine, and this is one of the passages they use. What is taking place? His soul is knit together. These are both men who are warriors, who are heroes, and they're becoming brothers. And when it says that he strips off his robe, what is happening? He is saying, here is the outward sign of my position. I'm the prince. I am now giving you my robe. In fact, there's another word that's commonly used, robe, cloak, or mantle. It's also translated, right? This is the robe of position. I am giving you my robes now. And not only that, I'm the prince. Here is my armor. And even more than that, my sword, my bow, and my belt. All of this he gives to David. And it's absolutely incredible, the humility that is taking place with that. Love it. Absolutely love this. I've often said that somebody once asked Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, how he was effective in preaching. And his response was, I start with the text and make a beeline to the cross. And as we've gone through Old Testament books, you see me over and over try to connect what is being said in the Old Testament to the Gospels. If you want to know why I preach that way, go online to our YouTube channel, listen to my teaching from last Wednesday, and I explain all of that from a theological perspective. But with this, there's a big part of me that wants to look at this, and the way I first started processing this story was to say, you know what, I love that Jonathan, who had everything in life, power, position, he had a future, was able to recognize the fact that standing before him was the true king of Israel. And he's willing to strip himself of all of his own personal glory and put it on this king. Oh, that'll preach, won't it? Oh, that'll preach. But then I realized that's actually not what the Bible says. The Bible talks about robes a lot. In fact, someday, I'll write a book, and not just my comic book series or my children book series, but an actual theological book. And I want to write a whole chapter about the robe. Because it's interesting when you track that theme throughout the Bible. I mean, you look at it. Go back to Genesis. Who has a robe? Joseph. And it's many-colored. And as he gets this robe, there's this whole thing happening where he starts having these dreams with his brothers, like trying to kill him or trying to bow down to him, and then they want to kill him, and it's all this mess. And it all starts with a robe and a dream. We go through in 1 Samuel. There's stuff in this book a lot about robes. Samuel, as a young boy, had a robe that he got every single year. Later in life, when the kingdom is being taken away from Saul, what does Saul accidentally do? Rip apart Samuel's robe. Elijah, You go to Elijah, and some incredible things happen with Elijah's robe, his cloak, his mantle. You go to the New Testament, and you see the true king, Jesus Christ, who had been wearing a robe, being stripped of it, and people casting lots, trying to get his royal robe. But the interesting thing is this. When you follow that theme, nowhere does it say to us today to take off our robes and put them on Jesus. Instead, it points out what Jesus did, and because of what he did, what happens to the robes we wear. Revelation chapter 7, verses 13 to 14, then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?" And I said to him, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." That's a miracle. Have you ever washed something that's white that has gotten filthy and dirty in blood? And it comes out clean, pure white. And that's what he says. The last chapter of Revelation, last chapter in the Bible, one of the last verses says this: "Blessed are those who wash their robes so that they may have the right to the tree of life and that they may enter the city by its gates." Isn't that incredible? What we are asked is to recognize the true King, his shed blood for us on the cross. And when we go to him, we can wash all of the sin and filth of our life off and be made pure white because of what he did for us in defeating our ultimate enemy, sin and death.